change. So it's really important to manage those resources effectively. And that's one of the reasons that we need nurse managers involved in change, is because they're usually in charge of distributing those resources. And of course, good communication skills. So need to be able to communicate the change, need to be able to communicate the need for change, and need to be able to ensure that it actually happens in an effective manner. So really important that nurse managers take on all of these types of roles if they're going to implement change. So it's not something that happens alone. You don't just manage change without all these other things. You need to integrate all these things together so that you can manage it effectively. So when it comes to actually managing change, quite often it's something that we need to have a very good plan for. So we have to identify what the problem is first up, so that we can then decide on what our priorities are, possible solutions, suggesting those solutions, and then evaluating outcomes for the future. So all of those things are really important in managing change. If you don't have a clear plan about how you're going to do it, then you're going to lose track along the way. Change doesn't usually come quickly. It's usually something that takes a long time to actually implement. So it's really important to document these types of things and make sure that everybody that's on the team is aware of what's going to be happening, so that everybody's on the same page and they're all doing the same things. So really important step there. So that identifying the problem is about finding information, finding out what is happening at the moment. Is there something that can be done better? Is there something that can be improved? Is there something that's changed in the wider world that we need to know about? So sometimes having that macro perspective is really important. We need to be able to think about the patient overall, the patient's pathway throughout the organisation, not just what we do, but also what others do within that organisation and how that impacts on the patient. Determining the impact of the problem. So it's really important. We're all in nursing because we want to help people. We don't generally get into nursing for other reasons. So we really do need to know what the impact is of the problem so that we can get other people on board. Most of the people that you manage as a nurse manager will have the same sort of ideas about what is important as you do. So if you can find out why this particular problem is so important to them or so important to your patient, how overcoming this problem is going to help your patient, then most of those people will be on board already. Most of them will want to help. Most of them are in the position for that particular reason. So it's really a way of making sure that you get your team together and that you inspire them all to do things, not just trying to make change yourself. So deciding on the priorities and solutions. So we do need to prioritise things. When we look around, we can generally see many, many things that we want to change. It's not a very perfect world, and we have lots of patients, so they have lots of problems. So quite often we can think of many things that we would like to change. So actually prioritising those things as according to perhaps the impact or the urgency of those issues is really important, so that we can decide on what we're going to address first. There's no point in trying to make hundreds of little changes and losing track of what they are and what's happening with them and things like that. If we can actually decide on one thing that's most important, particularly if we have a team, we might have different ideas about what's important. So it's really important to get that team on board and to make sure that they're going to engage with you and work with you. So sometimes part of prioritising is about getting that team involved, getting them inspired about the things that they care about. They may care about something more than what you do, and sometimes it's a good start. Small incremental change that's working towards what you want to work towards, that gets the team motivated and perhaps gets them a small win. So something small that they've been successful in might be a good step forward in terms of actually building relationships with those people and making them feel empowered that they can actually make change. So those types of things are really important. So looking at the impact of the change that we want to make, how important is it? Is it going to make a difference to lots of people or just one or two? So those types of things that can make a difference in terms of what we decide to do. Naturally, we want to help as many people as we can, so we can't do everything, but to perhaps decide on the thing that's most important, that's going to have the most impact on the most number of people is useful. Sometimes it's about urgency. So sometimes things are more urgent than others. I mean, we work in healthcare, so obviously we understand how some things can be more urgent. It's much more important that we breathe than that we eat. So, you know, things like that have always played a part in our minds as nurses. But again, when it comes to managing change as a nurse manager, deciding on what is more urgent is really important too. So it may be that there are some outside determinants of what is urgent. So sometimes when we have accreditation for our hospitals, for example, there are things that we need to get done for for those circumstances. Sometimes taking advantage of that is a really good idea. You might find that you actually get more funding for that because it meets the hospital's objectives as well as your own. So that means that you have more people who are interested, more people who are wanting that change to happen. Or it could be around something about safety, for example. So it's really important that we have safe workplaces and that our patients are safe when they come in. And certainly sometimes there's a big argument that we can make to management about urgency in terms of the amount of costs that would be involved if one of our patients was poorly affected. If they complain and they have an issue that requires some sort of compensation, then that's going to cost the hospital a great deal of money. So you might get people on board by identifying the urgency in terms of patient safety or something along those lines. So after that, we want to select appropriate solutions. So we want to look at a range of solutions. So again, particularly when you're leading a team as a nurse manager, then you might find that some other members of the team might see some things that you don't see. So they might be able to come up with solutions that you don't think of yourself. And sometimes they might be the best solutions. Not to mention that, again, they might empower those team members to actually make it happen, to make things work in a way that wouldn't happen if you told them what to do, if you enforced that decision on them. So sometimes, again, this can be very much a team building type of exercise of selecting appropriate solutions. And you want to make sure that those solutions are appropriate, that they are going to get your desired outcome, so that they're not just something that perhaps looks good but isn't going to actually meet your need. Planning how to accomplish the change is really important. So quite often we look at the possible barriers that we might come across so that we learn how to manage those, so that we get some ideas and that becomes part of our solution, is how to overcome those particular barriers so that we foresee what's going to be an issue and we know how to address it before it actually happens. So that's also a really important thing. Quite often we like to put timelines in when we're in the planning phase so that we actually know what we're going to have achieved by when, so that if by some chance we don't achieve that, that we can go back and make sure that it is going to happen. There's no point waiting until the end of your project to decide that you should have done something differently. You're putting in times to reevaluate and to look at how you're going for your plan. Gives you an opportunity to catch up if by some chance there's something unforeseen that happens or that you need to change in order to make your plan more effective. So when it comes to those solutions, like I said, involving influential staff is really important. So influential staff, the first thing we usually think of are our supervisors, our managers, and certainly those people are really important. If they're not keen for that change to happen, then they're not going to support it and it's not likely to happen. But sometimes influential staff are also the ones on the ground, the ones that are actually going to implement that change. If you don't have them involved, then quite often nothing will happen. They may say the right words, but they certainly won't necessarily make things happen if you haven't involved them very much. So it's really about seeing what issues that they think that they might come across and how they can overcome those in order to make sure that that solution is really going to happen and it's going to work for you. Setting smart goals, really important. As I said, we need to reevaluate quite often so that we know that if there's something small that is hindering us implementing change, so that we can make sure that we overcome that. And timing of communication. Sometimes it's really important to make sure that we time our communication appropriately. There's no point, for example, for me telling you at the end of a shift that I wanted you to do particular things because your shift's over and if you haven't already done it, then it's very unlikely that you're going to do it now. So timing communication is really important so that people have plenty of time to think about things, how they're going to do it, and make sure that they do get the time to do that. So that's really important in that regard as well. So I mentioned SMART goals. So I'm sure you've all heard about SMART goals. So we need goals to be very specific. We need them to be quite clear as to what it is that we actually want people to do. Somehow we need it to be measurable. We need to know how we're going to decide whether or not this goal has been met or not. And so we need to be clear about that too when we're writing our goals. Particularly when you're doing this as a nurse manager, you're communicating with the whole team. So it's really important for them to know about how you're going to measure whether that goal has been met or not, so that they know what is going to be collected, what data is going to be collected, and what information they're going to need to provide in order to demonstrate that they have been doing what they should have been doing. A lot of people get quite put off when their managers come in. So if you're a bit unclear about how you're going to measure that goal, then people might not be sure what it is you're going to be doing, and that might make them even more uncertain when you're talking to them. So part of building a relationship with them and making sure that they're going to achieve is about making sure that you're very clear on how you're going to measure that that goal has been achieved and their performance. Quite often people feel quite put out that somebody else is going to be judging their performance. So making them feel comfortable about that by having clarity about what you're measuring is really important. And of course that's achievable. So it's nursing is really hard at the best of times. And certainly I know our patient ratios over here aren't great. certainly not as great as we would like them to be, and I'm sure that you're not in a different position. So it's really got to be something that can be done. Um, if you're setting people up for failure, if you're telling them to do something that they can't possibly achieve, then you're not going to meet your plan. You're not going to achieve that. So it's setting them up for failure is the same as setting yourself up for failure. If it's not going to be achievable, then there's very little point in planning for it. So definitely need to make sure that that's happening. Relevant. So all those things have to tie in together so that they are measuring that specific goal that you did come up with, that they are all related and quite clearly related for you to get that buy-in from your staff so that they all agree with you and that they all know what the desired outcome is going to be. Time bound, as I said, we need to reevaluate often so that we really do have a look at what we do and whether or not we've achieved those little milestones along the way. So when we are setting goals, it's better to have a few of them that you can then readjust your overall plan for if something goes wrong along the way so that you can make sure that you're going to meet that goal. So making sure the time factors are well known is important. And then evaluating those outcomes. So with the SMART goals, you should have that measurable ability to decide whether or not that goal has been met. So that's really important when you're evaluating, that you go back to those goals and you look at whether or not that measurement has happened. Appreciating success is always a really important thing. So if people don't feel appreciated, then they're not going to want to engage with you for the next project that you come up with. So it's really important that we show our appreciation for our team and that we really do value that success that they've had and looking at how we can do that in an effective manner that's related to those outcomes. We also do need to appreciate pain. So change usually means that somebody's had to give up something that they've done in the past, and that can be quite painful for people. We put a lot of pride in our work and we become quite successful at doing things the way we usually do them. So when that's changed, we might feel quite incompetent for a little while we're learning that new skill or while we're giving up something that we thought we were really good at. And so it is really important to appreciate that people have gone through pain to get to that end point. And again, that's something to evaluate and to make sure that we are moving past it, that pain isn't so great for people that they're just going to slip back and do the same thing that they used to do after the project's over. So quite often, after we've achieved something, we want to have a maintenance period, something where we can actually make sure that we've continued with that change, that we are maintaining what we had said we would do. So really important to do that and to appreciate the impact that it's had on individuals because yeah, as nurse managers, we really are looking after our team and really making sure that we are working with them and that we understand what they're going through in order to manage them well. And then, of course, working towards the next change. So certainly, if you've had success, then you want to build on that. You want to keep focusing, keep moving forward. So it's usually easier to have small wins, small things that are happening that build into a greater, larger change. So certainly keep going with that and keep making sure that you do have some positive outputs there. As I said before, though evaluating milestones early gives you the opportunity to make changes if something isn't working. So you may have a plan for change, but you may need to change that plan if it's not working. So if you have had limited success with your change, then looking at how that you can build on that, on what you have done, or overcome the barriers that came up that perhaps you weren't aware of, so that you can get that positive outcome. So there's always more change coming. It's one of those things that we always do get. Change is inevitable. So it's really about that constant movement with our team of leading them through that pathway. And that is pretty much what I was going to cover. I was looking at the role of the nurse manager, how important that is, and how to manage change. So do you have any questions?
What an insightful lecture today. Thank you so much for the lecture today, Dr. Anderson. So now we are going to open discussion sections for 15 minutes. Perhaps before we start the discussion, I highly recommend to the class to turn the camera on. So during the discussion time, we have a good connections here by looking each other faces, even though still by virtual video. I will give a chance for 3 questions first because our limited time about our lecture today or nursing management in general. If every one of you have some questions, either you can deliver it with English or Indonesian language, it's okay. Please use the raise hand feature and directly say it through the microphone, or you can type the discussion down through the chat box. Do not forget to say your name first. Thank you. Okay. Um, Dr. Anderson, we have already one question in the chat box. Let me read the question for you, all right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Aura mentioned that SMART goals have to be measurable. What sort of measurement is often used in a clinical setting? So patient satisfaction or audit or something else. So it does depend on what you are measuring. So what that goal was in the first place. Remember how I said that everything had to be relevant? So it depends on what it is that you're looking at. So if you're looking at wound dressings, for example, and the material that's being used for those, then you might do an audit on what wound dressings are there before and after, so that you know how many of those have been used and how many of the old ones have been used, perhaps, if you have made a change there. Or you might look at things that are a bit more difficult. So a lot of places will have morbidity and mortality meetings. So you might have situations there where anytime somebody that dies in your ward, that you go through a full overview of what has happened to them and how that death progressed, whether it was natural causes or whether there was something that could have been done better. So you might have something like that. You might go with the patient satisfaction. I'm always a bit hesitant about patient satisfaction. It's something that it can vary, and it depends on, again, on what you're measuring. So if what you're measuring was whether or not the patient was satisfied, then of course that's the best way to go. But I find that sometimes what we're looking at in a clinical scenario is not necessarily something that patients understand. So patients might be very satisfied because you were very pleasant, but you could still have been doing the wrong thing while you were doing that. So it is something to bear in mind that it does depend on what it is you're measuring, what your goal was in the first place, that you need to be measuring at that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the answer, but let me repeat it in Indonesian language. Jadi Aura Tasya ini bertanya terkait dengan tujuan yang pintar atau smart goals yang memiliki measurable atau dapat diukur. Jadi Dr. Judith telah menyampaikan bahwasannya untuk tujuan yang pintar ini atau smart goals dalam setting klinik atau dalam klinik yang achievable measurement ini adalah spesifik dan itu terkait dengan kepuasan pasien masing-masing, sehingga ketika pasien ini sudah merasa puas, itu merupakan beberapa hal-hal yang perlu kita kaji ulang dan untuk kita tetapkan sebagai smart goals yang dapat diukur. Seperti itu teman-teman semuanya. Thank you so much for the answer once again. Okay, well, thank you, Aura Tasha, for the questions. Next, if any one of you have the other questions, please just delivering through the chat box or directly say it through the microphone. And it is okay if you delivering through Indonesian's language. I will help to deliver it to English. All right, Dr. Anderson, we have another question through the chat box. When making some changes in nursing care, how to deal with nurses who are resistant to change?
Yes, it's always difficult. As I said, I do find that most nurses want to look after their patients. So personally, I almost always call on that as being the most important thing. So we're here to look after patients, and this is going to help our patients in this way. So that's really the way that I would go. It's a matter of looking at what the situation is. If they come up with something that is quite reasonable as a barrier, then we need to acknowledge that. We need to understand that that is going to be a problem and that we need to be able to deal with that as well. So if it's something that is going to stop them from doing it, maybe it's a lack of time or something like that, that we need to be dealing with that as well. We need to be very much aware that resistance is something that can actually point out to us where we're going wrong with our plan. It can be that it's something that we hadn't thought of before. So it's really important to understand that. If things are really not happening, then there is always the chance that you might want to manage them in other ways. So you could go down that path. But generally, I think we usually find that quite difficult. It's much better to get them on board and to address their concerns, address their issues, and point out how beneficial it's going to be for our patients. So it's really important that way. When we manage people, usually we if we're managing poor behaviour, then we're building a negative relationship, and it's really difficult for that to then move forward in a pleasant manner that's going to be successful. I mean, it's not just patient satisfaction, it's also staff satisfaction that is important as well. So those things do need to be addressed. And I find that generally we don't have a surplus of nurses. We don't have too many nurses around. So if we have good nurses, then we certainly want to keep them. It's certainly something that is much better if we can educate them about better ways of doing things and to improve what we're doing.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Anderson, for the answer. And we have the other questions from Nurse Effie. Do we need to engage certain stakeholder or upper leader in order to implement our changes?
So it does depend on what the change is. Certainly, if you want to increase everybody's pay, then you would need to engage your upper leadership in order to do that because you don't have the ability to do it otherwise. So it needs to be something within your scope of practice, and if you are going to do it by yourself. But certainly, I think that there are many things that we can do without upper leadership being involved. It is important to recognise those things as well. As I said, staff satisfaction is also really important, and that is generally something that is within our realm as nurse managers, that we can work on that to perhaps make our staff a bit more satisfied. And I think what you'll find is that the literature also says that more satisfied staff lead to more satisfied patients. So, getting that team spirit, getting people involved in the care and building that relationship with staff is really important. So it is something that we should be doing whether or not our upper leaders are involved. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Before we move to other questions, I would like to ask from Nurse Ika, do you have any feedback to Dr. Anderson due to your questions?
No, it's enough. Thank you so much for the explanation.
Thank you so much, Nurse Ika. And then what about Nurse Evie? Do you have any feedback to the answer of Dr. Anderson?
I think it's enough. Thank you, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you so much. Well, we still have probably around 5 minutes during this discussions. I would like to ask for another questions, whether it's from the SAP. Silakan untuk mahasiswa dari SAP bisa menyampaikan pertanyaannya untuk Dr. Judith.
Mungkin Nia bisa pakai bahasa Indonesia ya tentang manajemen perubahan yang ada di rumah sakit. Mungkin teman-teman yang SAP ingin bertanya kesulitan apa yang dihadapi di management of change di rumah sakit itu apa gitu.
Okay, thank you, Nurse Evie. So we have the other questions, Dr. Andersons. What is the difficulty of the change in nursing management? Probably in a clinical setting, yes.
What sort of difficulties are there?
Yeah.
I think the biggest difficulty is always financial. We'd always like to do more and have more, wouldn't we? So I think budget constrictions are always a major difficulty. So not easy to overcome. Sometimes it is possible to get that buy-in from upper management to perhaps spend a bit more or purchase something that will help. So certainly that is one way forward. There's also quite often grants available that people can apply for and things like that. So that can help to actually fund some research or something like that that it can then be the start of implementing a change that then carries on afterwards. So that sort of thing is usually important. I suppose other difficulties often relate to education. So when there is something new, then it just because it is new, people don't really know much about it. So some education can help to provide some resources for them to overcome that lack of knowledge and how to implement it better. So that sort of thing usually helps. Yeah, they're generally the two biggest difficulties that I see.
Alright, thank you so much, Dr. Andersons. Jadi untuk kesulitan dalam kepala manajemen di sini, dikatakan bahwasanya dokter ini menjelaskan ada beberapa poin, yaitu ada dalam budget construction atau dalam konstruksi anggaran dana di rumah sakit, kemudian dalam edukasi. Jadi di sini kesulitan dalam mungkin mengatur dalam kepala manajemen ini itu dipengaruhi oleh adanya edukasi yang masih belum sesuai dengan target atau kriteria hasil yang kita inginkan. Jadi perlu adanya kita menanggapi atau meningkatkan dalam pendidikan di keperawatan, kemudian juga dalam penyusunan di budget atau anggaran dana. Seperti itu. Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson. I would like to ask one more time, if you guys have another questions for Dr. Anderson, I will give one chance for you, all students, whether it's from regular or SAP. Well, do you guys still have any other questions?
There is one in chat.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you, Nurse Effie. So Dr. Anderson, we have another questions from Nurse Linda. How to prepare nursing students as new graduates to adapt with the change from academic setting to clinical settings to reduce the nursing turnover?
Again, quite a difficult change for a lot of people. I certainly find that the biggest issue that those students, when they become new graduates, come across is the responsibility that goes with the change. So when they go on clinical placements during their course, they don't have that responsibility. They're just watching or following someone else. Most of the time, somebody else is telling them what to do. So for them then to be in a position where they have to make decisions is quite confronting for a lot of them. So it's really about making sure that the patients that we assign to them are ones that they can manage easily, that they do have the knowledge to look after those people. And again, that can vary depending on where they are. So some of our new graduates go straight into the emergency department, for example, and you can't always predict what the patient's going to be like in that type of a setting. Also that they have mentors around, that people that will support them, that can give them some advice on how to look after patients or how to do things that perhaps they weren't aware of. So I certainly find that quite often during our undergraduate course that students will be taught how to do something, they'll do it, and then they'll say, I've done it, I know what I'm doing now. But it's not quite the same as doing it many, many times. And the proficiency that you get with handling all that equipment and things like that. So I often do remind them in class times that we're here to practice and you need to make use of this as much as you can so that you're actually doing that. That knowledge base that they need is also a big thing as well, so that the ability to learn and to remember is really important. But what we find in the clinical setting is that the patients don't all come in with labels attached. They're not all obviously a diabetic patient or a cardiac patient or something along those lines. You know, sometimes they might have one of those conditions and then develop another condition. So it's really difficult for new graduates to get their head around what this patient is coming in with and things like that. And some of that is just about experience. It's really a case of the amount of times that we've seen it that makes a difference as to whether or not we will recognise what's going to happen in that type of situation. I think it's really important that they respect other people and other nurses. I think sometimes with some of mine, I find that they are quite confident, and there's nothing worse than overconfidence. If somebody uh, it doesn't know something but thinks that they do, that's when they're most likely to get into trouble. So, you know, having that that modesty and the ability to go to other people and check and make sure that they are doing the right thing is really important. It's certainly something that all of us struggle with, no matter what country we're in, is getting people from the academic setting into the clinical setting is not an easy task to do. And I suppose, again, it's one of those places where nurse managers are really important. So, you know, welcoming the new students in that might have new ideas, they might do things differently. And you know, it might be a better way to do things, is really important. Like I said, you know, mutual respect and working together is a really big thing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson. Before we move to the other agenda, I would like to ask the feedback from Nurse Linda. Do you have any feedback to Dr. Anderson's?
No, that's enough. Thank you for the explanation.
All right, thank you so much, Nurse Linda. Well, I think that's the end of our discussion sections. I have found a motivational quote of the day. Nurse is the first defined line in the hospital. As a nurse, we can work in collaborations with any other healthcare provider to make sure the well-being of the patients. Hope the quote of the day inspire and encourage ourselves to be better. I would like to thank everyone for being here. Our speaker, Dr. Anderson from Charles Sturt University, Australia. Nurse Ika as the coordinator of nursing management in this semester. Nurse Evie, Nurse Linda as a nursing management lecturer at the class of today, Nursing School, Barijaya University. We hope that we can learn a lot and are better suited for our study in Bachelor Science of Nursing. Well, unfortunately, our program is over. Please do not leave the Zoom meeting yet. Let's take a minute to pray, and the prayer started now. All right, the prayer is over. Thank you. Before we really end this program, please everyone can take a little moment to turn the camera on for taking the screenshot of attendance. And we will wait for all of the participants here. We have 4 pages. We highly recommend to all of the participants to turn the camera on for our attendance today. Thank you so much for everyone that already turned the camera on. We're still waiting on you. Okay, I think everybody all ready for the first screenshot today. Okay, well, I will help you guys to screenshot for the page 1. Okay, can you take a big smile in your face? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. That is for the first page. And move to the next page. Okay, get ready. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. Let's move to the other page. Page number 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. And the last page, page number 4. 1, 2, 3. All right. I think I already take the screenshot all of the page number 1 to page number 3, 4. Well, it's done. Thank you. If you have another activity, you can gladly leave the Zoom meeting. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson, for the time in here with us. I hope that this is gonna be like a good its experience in this meeting with us in lecture.
Thank you very much. It was lovely. I really enjoyed it.
Oh my gosh. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a nice day, Dr. Anderson. Thank you so much for sharing with us again.
Thank
Yeah.
you.